United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all. Madam Clerk, will you call the roll?
Aye.
Mr. Boyce?
Aye.
Mr. Hampton?
Aye.
Mr. Jensen?
Aye.
Mr. Johnson?
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor?
Present.
Ms. Rowland?
Present.
Mr. Taylor?
Present.
Ms. Wiles?
Present.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Great, thank you very much. We'll continue on with our agenda here with approval of minutes for the December 19th, 2017 meeting.
So moved. Second.
There's been a motion by Mr. O'Connor and a second by Mr. Taylor. All those in favor? 9-0. Next would be the approval of the minutes of the January 2nd, 2018 organizational meeting.
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve by Mr. Taylor, a second by Ms. Wiles. All in favor?
One abstention.
7 approve and 2 abstentions, I
abstentions.
believe. Next item, approval of the agenda. Any changes, additions, or subtractions to the agenda this evening?
Motion to approve?
Second.
Approval in a second. All those in favor? 9-0. Petitions or comments by citizens who are present. I have one, but it is tied to a ordinance we'll be discussing. I assume you'd like to speak at that point? Yes. Thank you very much. Moving on, council committee reports. Any committee reports? Mayor's report to council. I'm so sorry. I'm a rookie. Thank you very much. Mr. Mayor.
Members of council, Mr. President, thank you very much. It has been a bit busy around here, but I certainly hope everyone had a great holiday season. It's 2018, and I called the order of Board of Works this morning, and it's kind of hard to think that it is 18, but we're now back to work and ready to have a great 18. Before the end of the year, we did have a reopening of Bowl 32. The bowling alley on 32, been there for years. We have a new name, 3-2 Fun. And they have a laser tag, a whole new building of laser tag and some 60-some games, et cetera. Some council persons, people were with us. It's going to be a real attraction, a real amenity, if you will, to mostly young people, but maybe not always just young people. But they have a great investment in our community, and it's really a nice attraction, and we were happy to celebrate with them that opening or reopening. This weekend, before the snow and predicted snow, Robert Harrington, our public relations person, got together with Mrs. Johnson, street commissioner, and put on Facebook and maybe other medium, I only do Facebook, about the brine and why we do brine and when we do brine, et cetera. And it was very well received. I didn't know some of that, but certainly reading it, if you put the brine on too early and it rains, which we were anticipating, it's washed off. Put the salt on, it doesn't work, etc. So I want to congratulate him on that, and again, trying to communicate with the public. This weekend, we're anticipating, I'm not sure how much, but certainly could be a great amount of snow. And so we'll do that again and try to keep everyone informed of why and when and all that. Our people are ready, and we'll be ready. I did just learn today is National Law Enforcement Appreciation Day. And so, Chief, to you and all of your officers and everyone else in law enforcement, we do appreciate you. We did have a retirement today of 2 police officers, Eric Newman, 20 plus years, and Todd Borders, and we recognize them, or the chief and the department recognize for their service to Noblesville. Are there any questions of me? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I apologize for almost skipping over you there. Moving along, now we will go to council committee reports. Seeing none. Ms. Wiles, do you have a report?
I do, Mr. President.
Okay.
I have the honor of presenting the 2017 Stake in the Ground Award recipient. And I'd like to share some comments that we received from council members during the nominations process. For those in our audience, each year the council will nominate different department directors, and then a selection is made as to that person who we believe has done an outstanding job and to put their stake in the ground for that preceding year. So for 2017, I'm very pleased to announce that our Stake in the Ground recipient is John Berry. John Berry, as the city engineer, has initiated and completed projects throughout 2017, including helping to oversee the initial design of the Pleasant Street project and moving it forward. John and his department have managed the construction of various roundabouts, including the South 10th Street and Greenfield Avenue roundabout that significantly improves traffic flow. His work along 141st Street helps to ensure a successful outcome for the development of the Borg Warner site. John also takes the lead in working with the city and the number of developers and helps them work through the process. He always has the city's best interest in mind. So if you will please join me in congratulating John Berry as our 2017 Stake in the Ground recipient.
Congratulations, sir. Congratulations. You're good. You get one more? Another round.
I'd like to thank everybody here, each one of you individually. I'm kind of caught off guard. Steve kind of set me up. I wasn't prepared for this, so I appreciate everything you do for me, help me do my job, help my department. This certainly isn't individual achievement. I have a lot of good people that help me day to day, and I certainly wouldn't get through the days without your patience, so thank you.
We'll move on in the party spirit. It's my honor tonight to thank someone that has been a fearless leader for us over the last year, someone who took the reins of the council and has led with distinction and kindness and courage and tenacity, and the list goes on and on. I saved the good ones for later. But Megan Wiles is not only a friend, she's a friend to all of us and a true leader in this community, and served as president of the 2007 calendar year, and I hope the council members will join me. 17, you know, council year. I hope the council will join me in thanking you, Megan, for your distinguished leadership. So, thank you. Are there any other awards to be given out here before we move on? Some city business. Okay. Well, thank you to all of you. We'll move on to the approval of the claims. Council members should have received the claims via email, and if there's any questions, now is the time. I see Mr. Spalding's in the audience as well. If there are any questions, if not, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
Motion to approve?
I'll second.
Motion and approve and second by Ms. Wiles and Mr. O'Connor. All those in favor? 9-0. Thank you very much. Previously discussed ordinances. Previously discussed ordinance 60-12-17. Council to consider ordinance 60-12-17, an ordinance creating a new chapter 76 of the Code of Ordinances concerning the operation of golf carts within the city of Noblesville. I know I have an individual that would like to speak on this ordinance. I know we discussed it at length 2 weeks ago, so at this point in time, Ed Gebhardt, I believe, would come forward. If you please state your name and your address for the record, please, Ed.
I will. My name's Ed Gebhardt. I live at 4862 Waterhaven Drive at Slater Farms. I appreciate a couple minutes to speak to you all about this particular ordinance. My view of it is that several residences in my neighborhood currently possess and own and operate golf carts throughout, not just my neighborhood, but several neighborhoods in Noblesville. Being a person who resides and also works in Fishers, I see several carts also there as well. This obviously is a multiple community endeavor that our citizens want to partake in and participate in. The problem that I see is probably like some of you who have a little distaste for it is how do we stop it from getting out of control or causing issues? What I would say to you is that adopting a local ordinance and allowing it into the city of Noblesville actually gives you more teeth for your officers to make enforcement action on them. a set of fines and different things that you can hit for such as underage drivers, speeding, or even being on the main streets if you so choose, will allow your officers to have something that they can go to immediately that feels appropriate for the violation that they're out with at the time. The state statute is rather harsh, and sometimes law enforcement officers sometimes won't hit them right away with a $500 fine for such as a golf cart. So that's my professional view of it. I hope you take that into consideration. My personal view is that, I want to own one. So, I'm here as a community member, someone that supports Noblesville in full, and I've heard from several of my neighbors in my neighborhood, and they want to own them as well. I think that several of them will own them anyway. My profession and my views lean differently, that you have to do things right. You have to see the ordinance through council and make things appropriate so you can set a good example for your children, which my daughter's here with me now, and she wouldn't operate it unless she was within ordinance as well. So I think all that in combined, I just want to take a few minutes to let you know that I think that Noblesville will be on the right track embracing this phenomenon. I think that's taken over the city regardless of where we go tonight. I think we're going to see a lot more of them, and I hope you help the law enforcement out by giving them some teeth to have some enforcement action. That is all. Thank you for your time.
Any questions, Mark, Mr. Boyce?
You mentioned you work for Fishers. I know what you do, but would you mind telling everyone, just in case anyone doesn't know? I think that lends more credence to your views there also, please.
I am here as a private citizen of Fishers. The reason I can speak professionally to it, I'm the Assistant Chief of Police for the Fishers Police Department. So I know what you're going through because I've gone through it down there in my own city with my own mayor, with my own council. We have adopted an ordinance very similar. And some of the things that I speak to tonight come from that aspect. But believe me, I assured my chief that I'm not in the capacity of a law enforcement here tonight. I asked Chief Jowett if I could have permission to be here. He gave me permission, so I'm here. So I thank you for your time. Is that enough? Any questions?
Thank you. Appreciate it, Mark. Appreciate it. Any other council comments on ordinance 60-12-17? Mr. Taylor?
I got a few. I've looked over this ordinance quite a bit in the last 2 weeks, and while I agree we need an ordinance, I have problems with this ordinance, and I also said that 2 weeks ago. I don't think it's fair to everybody in Noblesville. It's only going to apply to the ones that's got HOAs. I do see us needing something to enforce golf carts for the police department, but however, I see holes in this one, and I'm really concerned about these crossing over on our streets. It makes more sense to me to have an ordinance for golf carts, maybe in addition to have actually golf courses. You can enforce it a little better in my opinion, and I'm not trying to tell the chief anything, but I just feel like there's holes in this, and I feel like we're going to have some problems, and I feel like you're leaving some people out. And I know that most of the communities that's got golf courses want golf carts. I can see that part of this ordinance, but I'm having trouble with the rest of it. That's all I got to say.
Initial comments? Mr. Johnson?
I've got quite a bit of things to just bring up, so bear with me. First, before I get into this, I want to say that there isn't a person in this council that I don't have great respect for and personally like. So if I get a little passionate, I get a little raised voice or something, please forgive me. It's nothing personal, because I like all of you a lot. I believe that this is not in the best interest of the community as a whole, that it's only in the best interest of a select few people who have requested it. And I think it's going to create more problems, complaints, and issues than we possibly can imagine. It's more legal. I know that one of the bigger things is it's going to make it more safe or safer. I don't think I buy into that, because if you take something that's being done now, we have correct me if I'm wrong, Counselor, but I think there's already a statute in place for this, and it's a state law.
It's an absolute prohibition on public rights.
Yeah, but are our city policemen able to enforce that?
I believe they are, and I think Chief Jowett spoke to this issue before, and he studied the details more than I have. Chief, you want to?
Yes. They are illegal by state statute. We are able to enforce it. The enforcement is a little bit different. The state statute that prohibits golf cart operation would require an officer to cite a violator into county courts rather than Noblesville City Court, because it's a state statute violation that has nothing to do with ordinance. There's no provision under the state statute for even dealing with an underage operator. So our officers essentially could not enforce the statute with an underage operator except to impound the golf cart, presuming it was stopped in a location where it was being operated illegally.
Would that be like similar to driving without a license then?
Well, it was like a 14-year-old.
Yeah.
Yeah, right, exactly.
I mean, wouldn't they be brought up on that?
I'm sorry?
On driving without a license?
No, because it's a golf cart. And again, this is where adoption of a local ordinance clarifies a great many things, as Ed mentioned a minute ago. It clarifies a great many things for police officers. Right now, the only things we could do enforcing existing law, which is the state statute, is to cite an operator who is of legal age to be cited. There's no provision for citing a parent who's allowing an 8-year-old, for example, to operate a golf cart. And we would also have the option and probably the obligation to impound the golf cart, just because since they're not legal, there is no legal way an operator could drive a golf cart away from the location where he or she was stopped.
Okay. You may have a few other things to answer here.
I'm
If you don't
very
mind
willing to
standing up
stand
there,
here.
Chief, I appreciate it.
Sure.
Because there's some clarifications on some things that I'm not sure of. At one point, we had talked about that there would be required, and I know this would make more work for you guys initially, at first, anyway, is having some kind of a permit that they would have to maybe be a sticker, like a boat sticker, a license on a local level here. And that would give a manner for you to be able to track them. What I'm trying to get at is, I'm not for this at all, but if we're going to have it, there's some real problems, I think, with the way this one is written. So let's try and get them right. And I don't see anything in here about a permit or any kind of legal says, yes, you can drive this or anything like that, or no registration or whatever you want to call it. So that's one of the things that we talked about in the past, but I don't see it in here that would have to be renewed, every year or 2 years, whatever it would be. And one of the goals, the intent, it says to ensure public safety and welfare, the operation of golf carts must comply with certain vehicle regulations, must be prohibited on certain streets, and must comply with certain safety regulations tailored to protect the operator and passenger. The next page for me, under 76.03, minimum safety equipment, it talks about headlights, taillights, turn signals. It does not mention brake lights. It definitely doesn't mention a third brake light, and it definitely doesn't mention seat belts, which we all think seat belts on a golf cart, how ridiculous can you get? But the deaths that I'm aware of from golf carts have always been from someone who was trying to avoid a car, and they threw themselves out of the golf cart, hit their head in the pavement, and die. Hopefully that would never happen here. That's what we're looking for. It says a rear view mirror, not a rear view mirror on both sides or anything like that. Slow moving vehicle sign that conforms to the provisions of Indiana Code 9-21-9-2, affixed to the rear of the golf cart. Now, I would assume that means it has to be visible. In other words, if you've got golf carts in the car, or in the golf cart, do they cover up the slow-moving vehicle sign? That needs to be someplace where it's visible, even if there's golf cart or golf clubs in there. Then we go to the minimum safety thing and all that. Somewhere later in here, and I'll get to it, but we need to talk about insurance. I know we talked about responsibility, and I'll get to that in a little bit. Then we go down to 76.04, general regulations. And most of that's fine until you get to letter C, and they talk about the maximum occupancy of a golf cart traveling on city streets shall be one person per bucket seat, and 3 persons per bench seat. Now, if you've ever ridden on a golf cart and you try to put 3 people in there, it doesn't work. And if you think the driver isn't having a problem driving when there are 3 people in the bench seat, you're not paying attention, because it's very, very difficult to drive with 3, particularly adults. If you had 2 adults, you can't get 3. If you have adult and 2 kids, yeah, you could probably manage that. But the idea that a bench seat fits 3 people is absurd, quite honestly. And then we get back to letter E, talks about golf carts must be operated in compliance with all applicable local and state traffic laws, and the operator may be ticketed in the same manner as motor vehicle operators. Well, that would mean then that you have to have a seatbelt, because we just said, and this is part of, if we're going to write it this way, let's write it correctly. In my mind, we've just said it's going to follow, correct me if I'm wrong here, Counselor, that it's going to be, it can be ticketed in the same manner as a motor vehicle operator. If we're going to write this so you don't have to have a seatbelt, we need to say with some exemption or something like that in there. But once again, that's usually where the damage comes, is the lack of a seatbelt. Turning to page 3, under letter K, exemptions. Golf carts operated by the persons or entities described below in the manner described below or on the following property are not subject to the provisions of this chapter. Number 1, the operation of golf carts, this is an exemption, the operation of golf carts at golf courses, private clubs, or in private property with the consent of the owner, or traveling to a golf course, private club, or private property within 1/2 mile of the operator's residence for golfing purposes. I'm not sure of the intent of this, but I'm pretty sure of the meaning of it when I read it. If you really read this with the commas where they are and everything else, it looks to me like you have to be within 1/2 mile of your residence. And you have to be going to play golf. In other words, you can't take it to the beach club or someplace like that, because of the way this is worded. If that is not the intent, then we need to change that. I can think of a lot of people who have to drive a lot further than 1/2 mile from their residence to get to the golf course or even the beach club or anywhere else. So I think that's probably written wrong. And I would ask you, Counselor, if you'd look at that and see if you can, if I'm way off base here, please tell me. But it looks to me like, based on what it says here, as long as the person says they're going to golfing and their residence is within 1/2 mile of the course, they can drive anywhere. And they could drive on Kerrigan Road if you were coming from Kerrigan Crossing, or Kerrigan Cove, excuse me. There's no other way to get to North Harbor Golf Course without driving on Kerrigan Road, which would be a prohibited thoroughfare under this ordinance. Yet this appears to say that yes, he can, as long as he's going for golfing purposes and he lives within 1/2 mile of the golf course. Again, technicalities, they sound ridiculous, but I'm not the attorney that's going to bring the lawsuit to us if we don't have it written correctly. What was the next item I had? Under the disclaimer. I believe our disclaimer would probably have a lot of personal injury lawyers salivating, because we're talking about this and we're pretending that it makes this safer. It doesn't make it safer. It makes it more legal, but the same people are going to be, more people are going to be out driving on the roads with golf carts than they are currently. So even though it's legal, it can't, there's no way it can be more safe when there's more of them out there. But we're saying in the disclaimer, and I'll read it, golf carts are not designed for or manufactured to be used on public streets, and the city neither advocates nor endorses the golf cart as a safe means of travel on public streets. The city in no way shall be liable for accidents, injuries, or death involving the operation of a golf cart. So what we've just said for the personal injury lawyers is, they're going to jump all over this because they're going to say, you even say in your ordinance, it's not safe, but we're going to let you do this. So we've stated in here, it's not designed for or manufactured to be used on public streets. And yet, here we are allowing people to do it as young as the age of 16 years old. And I think they would start going down that road of you willingly put into effect an ordinance that you knew was unsafe for my client, and it would just go on from there. I just think that if we're going to have something like this, we need to get this stuff a lot clearer. I'll move on. We also talk about, in letter C, under 76.05, insurance. Any operator, upon request by a law enforcement officer, shall provide proof of financial responsibility / certificate of compliance for the operation of the golf cart on city streets. This proof of financial responsibility shall mean, pursuant to Indiana Code 9-25-2-3, proof of ability to respond in damages for liability that arises out of ownership, maintenance, or use of a golf cart in amounts equal to or greater than those specified in Indiana Code or by the Indiana State Department of Insurance for motor vehicle coverage. I've not been able to find the Indiana Code yet to see what that says. And I know we're all thinking, oh, that means we need an insurance certificate. Is that what this says? And is that the way it would be interpreted in a court of law?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yes, this reflects the language that the statute that describes motor vehicle insurance uses.
Okay. I mean, if everybody is fine with that and we get a legal ruling on it, that yes, that what we're saying is you need a certificate of insurance for this thing, just like you do a car. Great. Under 76-06, subdivisions and neighborhoods approval. Letter B, the subdivision or neighborhood must have a governing body, homeowners association, or decision-making board authorized to speak on behalf of the welfare of the neighborhood. That seems a little vague to me. Who's to say that a bunch of people in downtown, because they want to drive golf carts, can't get together and say, we represent this area? I mean,
It most likely should be a property owner association created by the covenants of the particular neighborhood. That, one of the problems with that expressly leaves out any neighborhoods that were created by, before everyone had covenants. There aren't many. South Harbor would be probably the first of many, and everything since then has a POA created by the covenants. But, you know, the Downtown Homeowners Association, we plowed that several years ago about wanting them to have historic districts and so forth and so on. And the question is, who's the chief that speaks for the Indians? And that becomes a conundrum.
yeah. Well, and that's, once again, this is one of those issues that comes up that I think we're creating more problems and issues down the road than we thought we were. We also talk about letter B under C, under the process, install signage at entrance of the subdivision that complies with city ordinances concerning such signage, warning motor vehicle operators and pedestrians of the possibility of golf carts being operated on the streets therein. So that would not only be at the entrance to those subdivisions, but it would also be on the main roads that are coming up to those subdivisions. Wouldn't you surely want them there also, Chief?
The way this ordinance is written, it would not contemplate operating on roads leading up to the subdivisions.
No, but if a car is coming on, let's say Kerrigan Road, and let's say Oak Bay has decided they want to have this, and they have their signs within Oak Bay, but we're also going to need signage out on Kerrigan Road letting the drivers of motor vehicles coming along that they could encounter golf carts.
I think what this is contemplating is that, for the example of Oak Bay, there would be a sign as you turned into Oak Bay. And typically, there's speed limit signs posted at entrances to subdivisions once you turn into the subdivision.
Yeah, but I'm talking about the person coming off of Hague Road,
Right.
and they turn west down Kerrigan Road.
Mhm.
And they're just cutting along Kerrigan Road. They need a warning that there could be a golf cart crossing the road there. And the way I read this, it doesn't read that way to me. This reads within the subdivision to me.
Right. Crossing is dealt with in a separate section, and I'll need to find it. I don't know that there was a...
We'll get to it.
Okay.
But anyway, so one of the questions becomes, since this is within the subdivision has elected to do this, is a subdivision then one responsible for paying for these signs? Or does the city pay for them? Just a question. I'm not saying I have an answer one way or the other. Then we get to the, I believe, last page, that was letter K, excuse me, that was the last page. No, the last page is 76.07 and 76.08. Penalty for violation is 76.08. Any violation or provision of this ordinance or failure to comply with any of its requirements shall subject the offender to a penalty as follows. A, amount of $50 for first offense. B, amount of $150 for a second offense during a rolling 12-month period. And then C, in the amount of $300 for a third and each subsequent offense within a rolling 12-month period. If you're getting somebody who's doing this 3 times, it's not by accident, it's intentionally. And I believe upon the third offense, that this should be a $300 fine and revocation of their privileges for 1 year. You can't just say, well, from here on out, we're good, $300 a time, we're fine. We need something a little more substantial that's going to make sure they don't have a violation such as that.
That'll also include in addition to court costs.
Yes, in addition to court costs as well.
Imposed in addition to these.
Yeah. So that needs to be in there as well. Chief?
It's in there. It says it.
It's in there.
Keep reading further down. It says court costs.
It possibly does, yeah. I'll look and see. Oh, it does. I remember that. Yeah, it does say that in there. But Chief, is the 50, 150, and 300, is that consistent with other traffic violations for regular motor vehicles? Because we're talking about this being like other motor vehicles.
Again, it's not dissimilar from the fee structures that are available in city court. It is dissimilar from those used by county court, because those all go back to state statute.
Okay. But this hopefully then, if we have this in place, would be in a city court situation. Correct. So that's similar to that then?
Yes.
Okay. Then we get to the very last paragraph of that. Here's the next paragraph. I'll go back. Well, a second or subsequent offense occurring more than 12 months since the last offense shall be considered a first offense, excuse me. The penalties listed in this section do not include court costs and fees, actually fees should be fees, that may be imposed by Noblesville City Court in addition to the penalty. So that's where that is. The next paragraph is another one I have a question about. If a police officer employed by the Noblesville Police Department finds cause to issue a notice for a violation of this ordinance, the officer has discretion to issue the notice/citation to the golf cart operator, or in instances where the operator is an unlicensed juvenile, to the parents of said operator. I would almost say that has discretion to, if we're talking now about we're going to have something to enforce, it should say shall, not has discretion to. And if you want to give them one warning, I'm fine with that. But once you get past that first time, then it's shall. Your thoughts, Chief?
That's up to the discretion of the council. My belief is we should always allow officers discretion in the field, because no two situations are ever alike. And we have to trust the officers to utilize their judgment based on the facts that are present at that particular point.
Yeah. And I totally get that, and I'm in agreement with that on most levels. But we have a mechanism in place already, which is state law. One of the big battle cries about this is it gives us something locally to get a handle on this and enforce it. What I don't want to see is we put this into effect and it just continues to go unenforced. And if we put some guidelines in here that say you have discretion, but once you reach a certain level, maybe it's the third one, I don't know, then it's shall instead of has discretion to.
I think that is going to be problematic in terms of application if we do that. We have 52 officers assigned to the patrol division. There is no mechanism to track the number of times a particular golf cart has been stopped. So an officer who had not had prior contact with that individual wouldn't necessarily know.
So at what point?
And I think what this is driving at, I think the word discretion.
I see a word there that also means non-enforcement. Now, I know our police force, and I love our police force. And I don't think we have anybody on there that would intentionally let somebody go because they knew their parents or whatever the case may be.
Right.
I think it would be an extenuating circumstance. But as we grow, that force size and everything else changes and dynamics change. And what I want to see is the one thing you have always told us, Chief, and I will go to my grave remembering this, is that whatever you pass as a council, just keep in mind, we have to enforce.
Right.
And I want to make sure that you're able to enforce this, that we aren't creating some ambiguous, nebulous ordinance that can just be kind of sloughed off the shoulder, that we truly do. I actually thought, because of where I live in the district I live in, which includes North Harbor and Harbor Trees Golf Course, that I would get a lot of response from some of the citizens who were really in favor of this. The only responses I got were from people who did not think it was a good idea. And it was actually a shock to me. I honestly was really thrown for one on that. But so I want to make sure that we have something in here that allows us to enforce this, does not put you guys in a compromising situation when they say, well, you know, the last police officer we just talked to, he said it was okay, let us go. Well,
Again, it's up to the council. We don't have any ordinances, city ordinances that I'm aware of that are shall ordinances. There are very few state laws that are shall. The only one that pops into my mind readily is domestic violence arrests. We always allow the officer to evaluate the circumstances that he or she is dealing with at that moment and then take appropriate enforcement action.
Yeah.
Now, I will tell you that once whatever action is taken by this body is taken, we will begin enforcing whatever that is. And if the council opts to not pass an ordinance, we will begin to enforce the state law as it's written, which prohibits golf carts everywhere on city streets, essentially.
Which means we need to close Harbor Trees Golf Course.
Yes.
And lots of other golf courses around the city of Noblesville.
so moving on from that then, and like I said, maybe the shall becomes on the third offense when I believe they should have their privileges revoked upon the third offense. I don't think that that's very often going to be a extenuating circumstance 3 times in a row.
Mr. Johnson, could I make one comment
no,
about and it just you're talking about privileges. That would only work if carts were permitted, and it would allow us to revoke a permit. Because
but I think they should be permitted.
Well,
How do we discover that, oh, this is a third offense if we haven't been tracking it?
we can track the individual operator, and if it's the third offense for that individual person, as long as stops have been logged in our logging system, that is traceable.
Is it discretionary, take this as a warning? Is that logged?
Yes, unless, everything in law enforcement is discretionary, unless it's a shall.
No, is it logged, they said?
I'm sorry?
Is it logged? So do we know they've been stopped and been given a warning?
Oh, yes. Yeah, typically. Any action typically an officer engages in is logged.
Johnson? Mr. Johnson?
Yeah, go ahead.
And Mr. President, just real quickly, if I can interject.
Speaking to your microphone.
I'm trying to.
Thank you.
I haven't talked in so long, I can't. I appreciate your passion on this. I also think, and no disrespect to you, Counselor Howard, we could probably pick through about every ordinance we do, maybe not to this level. I agree with a lot of what you're saying, Mr. Johnson. I do have some problems with some of the ambiguities. I do have a problem with what Mr. Taylor said with there are places not governed by HOAs that aren't involved in this. But what I don't want, and when I listen to Mr. Johnson here, is I don't want our police force spending a lot of time chasing down golf carts in this community. I'd rather you be doing other things. There's a lot else far more important than whether or not a golf cart is loose on a street in North Harbor. That's my question to you. With these ambiguities Mr. Johnson's talking about, are we creating a problem where there's so many different levels to it that it will become more difficult than it should be?
I think one thing that got mixed up in the whole dialogue is, are we tracking the piece of equipment or are we tracking the operators? In other pieces of law, we do not ticket cars, we ticket operators. So, and with that, I'm not sure having permits and who did it 3 times and did the parents allow different kids to operate it, that you're chasing a real issue there. We deal with behavior, not use. And I think if we stay with behavior like we do in the rest of the traffic law, we're going to be a lot better off.
And that's fine, because that would mean, that's really what I'm getting at. I'm not saying the whole family can't drive it. I'm saying that person can't drive it. So it's probably tied to their driver's license then.
Well, one of the things you talked about, for example, they are under the same rules as if they would be driving a motor vehicle. They would have to stop for stop signs. They would not, correct me if I'm wrong, they could be cited for operating while intoxicated. I mean, if they're coming back from the clubhouse and using a golf cart as not a way to avoid operating a motor while intoxicated, that would be the same thing. So there's a lot of safety in there that isn't included in that ordinance. The section that embraces the whole operation of a motor vehicle takes care of a plethora of the issues you've brought up. And if you look at them instead of in the 4 pages of this document and look at that in broad terms, it takes care of a lot of those issues.
Yeah.
There's still some out there. I've got some notes.
Yeah. And
I just would like to share with Mr. Johnson that during the drafting of this ordinance, we did work with Captain Williams from the police department, who I believe has a legal background.
He's an attorney.
He is an attorney. So he really took into consideration both the legal aspects of this as well as what are the enforceable aspects from the police department. So while it may not be perfect, we thought that this was the best place that we could start. Regarding the permitting idea, we did discuss that during this go-around for this ordinance, and we decided against it because, one, we didn't want to impose an additional fee on our residents, but if we go through a permitting process, there is time and cost to the police department for the implementation of that and the tracking of that.
Oh, there's no question, yeah.
That was the decision. I mean, we consciously talked about whether or not to permit, and we decided not to do it at this time.
Yeah.
Is this perfect? It may not be perfect, but it is certainly a starting point for those communities and those neighborhoods that have golf carts in their community, and how we can provide some more safety measures for those communities, as well as giving our police department the opportunity to do some enforcement when there are operators who are using their golf carts inappropriately.
Yeah, and I totally disagree saying the safer thing. There's nothing safer about it. We haven't instituted anything that makes it safer. Because in our disclaimer, we say golf carts are not designed for or manufactured to be used on public streets, and the city neither advocates nor endorses the golf cart as a safe means of travel on public streets. once again, I think we're just opening up the door wide open for personal injury lawyers with a statement like that.
Mr. Boyce?
But one other thing, I'll finish and get off my soapbox here, I'm sorry. And that is that I truly believe when you get to that third and beyond offenses, something has to be done at that third offense that is much greater than a $300 fine. And it has to end the privilege of driving golf carts. And you can track that with the driver's license then.
Right, and two thoughts. One, the fine structure and the imposition of penalties all rests on the court. That's not anything that has anything to do with the police department. That's completely the discretion of the city court judge. He, of course, would follow whatever is in the ordinance, but it's up to the court finding what number a particular offense is and then complying with ordinance as far as what the penalty is. Second thought, I don't know that there is a mechanism under which we could revoke someone's ability to operate a golf cart simply because we don't give them.
On the streets, not on the golf course, but on the streets.
But again, I don't know how we would do that. There's nothing in state statute that contemplates it, and there's nothing in this ordinance that requires an operator to have a permit or permission in some way. So I'm simply saying I don't see that there would be a mechanism to tell someone you can't legally operate a golf cart again just because
on the streets in the city of Noblesville.
Right.
I think we can put that in here and do that. Am I wrong?
It would have to be a separate provision that's not included in here.
I mean, here's the deal. If you get these people that are doing this.
For vehicles called the BMV.
Yeah.
They don't keep track of how many speeding or improper turn or disregarding the stop sign is. It's the BMV. I think that.
But they will revoke your license.
This is not tied to BMV.
And again,
let me qualify that. If we're writing citations under state statute or under local ordinance that tie back into state statute for violations of motor vehicle code, for example, failing to stop at a stop sign, that does tie right back into their driving privileges and can result in suspension or revocation of a driver's license. If we are writing a citation for too many people in a golf cart or a golf cart being operated in an area where it's not permitted, that's not contemplated anywhere in state statute regarding motor vehicle use, so it doesn't tie to any provisions of driver licensing.
Which, Chief, then if they ran a stop sign, would we ticket them as if they were in a motor vehicle?
Yes. The citation would not be for anything. The citation would simply be, and the ordinance describes the ability to do this, citation would simply be disregarding a stop sign, as though they'd done it in a car.
Well, I guess I'm missing why one doesn't tie into the other. We're going to know if they've committed 3 violations. Am I correct in that? Because they're going to get fined 50, 150, and 300. So we're going to know that. At that point in time, we could say, okay, you no longer are allowed to drive a golf cart on the streets in Noblesville, not on the golf courses in Noblesville, not on the streets of Westfield, but in the streets of Noblesville for 12 months, or whatever the case may be.
We would have to write a provision in here.
Well, that's what I'm getting at is I believe there are several things within this ordinance that need to be tweaked. I'm not in favor of it at all, but if we're going to have it, which I believe it's going to pass, we need to get it so that some of these things are covered.
Mr. Boyce.
I just was going to thank Ms. Wiles for mentioning that he has an accounting or an attorney background. I did not know that. That makes me feel a lot better. Thank you.
Further comments? Mrs. Rowland?
I feel this is very complex and hard. It's going to be very difficult for the police department and our citizens to know if they're in compliance or not. I find most people can't remember when to put their garbage can out, let alone this much complexity over their golf cart. So, but my confusion, I believe, and I have not read this 22 times, but is the streets. What if we have a neighborhood that says, yes, golf carts are great, that's a city street. And I hear this city street comment coming from lots of different directions. But my thought is, how do I get in my golf cart from my neighborhood, and I want to go to another neighborhood that has agreed? And I'm going to have to get out onto something, a city street or a major highway or something. I'm confused that how they're allowed to do that. And are they allowed, and where does it say it in here?
No, they're not.
So are they limited just to their neighborhood?
Yes, and there are a few exceptions. And as to your example, if someone was crossing, if Oak Bay and North Harbor, say, both had permitted use of golf carts, an individual could cross Kerrigan Road at 90-degree angle and go from Oak Bay into North Harbor and be compliant with the ordinance. A person couldn't go from
Kerrigan Cove.
Lions Creek Apartments
Lions
to
Creek Apartments,
North
true.
Harbor, because that's going to entail travel on a city street, not crossing it.
So it says in here, just crossing the street.
Yes, crossing the street at 90-degree angle.
The street they're crossing can't have a speed limit in excess of 45 miles an hour.
And they cannot travel on roads that the speed limit is more than 25 miles per hour.
They are in subdivisions.
That's the purpose, is to keep them in that zone.
Right.
76-04, Section A, for your reference.
All I know is I have family that lives in Cicero, and it is the Wild West in Cicero. And I have a heart attack with my family who has a golf cart, and they're out there crossing the bridge, the causeway. They're going to the ice cream store. They're going to get pizza. They're doing everything. And I just can't imagine that the people who want to use their golf cart are going to understand this ordinance, but I do understand we have to cover the bases, but it seems like we're covering more for the city than we are for the golf cart. And somehow, if we could make it easier, less complex, so people can at least comply. I don't think anybody will comply, because you give them an inch, they're going to be out everywhere. They know what other communities get by with, and that's my main concern, is the safety issue, how you're going to be able to even enforce this thing. The exceptions are confusing. I'm going to think I'm an exception, maybe, I don't know, or an argument could be, there could be an assumption. I don't know, if we could somehow, have we looked at other communities that evidently Fishers is managing it successfully, but.
This very closely mirrors Fisher's ordinance. We copied theirs. We made some changes, but we looked at 4 different scenarios for this. One was just remaining compliant with state statute, and that's it, which basically makes golf carts illegal, makes it a Class C infraction, which is up to a $500 fine, would also pretty much require us impounding golf carts when we encountered them. So that was scenario A. Scenario B, which kind of is maybe the next step up, we discussed, and I know the council members who were working with this group discussed another concept of just allowing them just in golfing communities. This is maybe the next tier above that. But I think a couple of you will remember an ordinance draft from 7 or 8 years ago that essentially allowed.
Very well, yeah.
Yes, it allowed operation freely through much of the city. That ordinance was incredibly complex. I think it was almost 40 pages. It would have been extremely difficult to administer. So we have a comfort level with this. We think we can enforce it. Obviously, whatever action's taken, there's going to be a significant public education component. We want people to understand what they can and can't do legally in a golf cart, whatever that outcome is. And we will absolutely advance the public education piece through our community affairs officer in whichever direction that we go. But to answer your question, Mrs. Rowland, yes, we did look at what other communities are doing. We've talked with Cicero, we've talked with Lebanon, Fishers, Carmel, Westfield, and this very closely mirrors Fishers. One of the reasons is we thought the geography of Fishers is very similar in some respects to the geography of Noblesville in terms of there's a downtown that's different than areas where there are subdivisions. And I think that's what Fishers contemplated when they drafted their ordinance.
I have one other question. If you think you can enforce this, and if the work of the but my last question is, do you have any idea how many people in Noblesville have golf carts?
Absolutely none. But I'm sure it's more than we think. And I when we first started talking about golf carts 8 years ago or 9 years ago, we had a fraction of what we have now. So I guess the way I think about this is, one of our obligations is just to deal with the situation that we're facing today. And we have so many more golf carts out, really in virtually every neighborhood in the city than we did 8 or 9 years ago when we were looking at the large, complicated ordinance. Cicero is a town of about 2,500 people, and they have about 250 golf carts. So that's 10% of the population that has golf carts. If you extrapolate that to our numbers, we'll end up with 6,200. And that's one of the reasons I'm opposed to permitting, because there's no way without adding significantly to staff that we can inspect and issue permits for 6,200 golf carts.
I would suggest that once the word's out and people realize it's okay, then we'll have a lot more. That's what I'm afraid of.
President,
Ms. Wiles?
I guess I would like to clarify or make the comment that by doing this ordinance, we're trying to keep golf carts within their local neighborhoods. We're not encouraging golf carts as an alternative form of transportation. So we don't want them traveling on city streets. We don't want them going to the ice cream shop or anything else. It's, if you want to go from your house to your clubhouse and your pool in your own neighborhood, great, you're on your neighborhood streets. Or if you happen to need to cross over like an Oak Bay to a North Harbor, that's an okay thing. It's not to go from Oak Bay down to Friendly Foods to pick something up at the shop down there. So it's more of trying to keep the golf carts in their own communities.
And part of this is a companion piece to the prohibiting motor vehicles on trails. Because once we start enforcing that, when the weather warms up, people who are using trails right now are going to be very inclined to get out on the streets. So this is controlling another aspect of that issue.
Mr. Howard, do you have a comment?
Couple of comments, and this has nothing to do whether it's a good idea, bad idea, whatever, but just from a legal standpoint. On 76.05A, I think Mr. Johnson's comments are well taken. I think assumption of the risk in B takes care of that issue, and I would strongly recommend that there be an amendment to delete A and title assumption of the risk and insurance, the new A and B. And below that in 7606, I would strongly suggest decision-making board created by the covenants of the subdivision or other organization, because you don't want to start refereeing who is the acclaimed proponent of the entity. So for 90% of your entities, it's going to be the Property Owners Association. That's clarification. Whether it's a good idea and bad idea, you're all on your own.
Is there a motion to amend according to Mr. Howard's comments?
So moved.
Second.
So there's a movement by Mr. Rowland, a second by Mr. Boyce. All those in favor? 8 to, all those opposed? 8-1. Further comments on the ordinance? Mr. Johnson?
I still believe that there are some other things that needed to be added in here. We talked about the brake lights, right? That probably needs to be an additional amendment to this. Is that correct, Counselor?
I think these are the things that I thought would expose us to more liability and make more problems than they're worth. Whether it's a good idea or bad idea, I think we will evolve, and this is, with the starting point, I think it's a big jump into the deep end. And whether you're going to do brake lights or whether you're going to do other things, I'm going to leave that to the enforcement people and subsequent amendments if it becomes a problem.
The other piece of this is that if we were going to do a golf cart ordinance, I would rather see it in the golf cart communities within Noblesville, the North Harbor, Sagamore, places like that. But I still think you need all these different things. I don't think, I'm still not comfortable with the violation penalties and stuff. I think you're going to have blatant people who have money and they don't care about the $300. They're just going to continue to do it. And there has to be something that puts a stop to that. And Ms. Rowland, I just want to throw something out in defense of the people that wrote this. I've talked to a lot of the people that were involved with the Cicero ordinance, and many of those people think it's the worst thing the city ever did. But this is not the Cicero ordinance at all. That was, like you said, Wild West. So.
President, I just want to
Mrs. Wiles,
clarify that with the brake lights, most of the time when you have the headlights,
And
that
turn
includes-
signals, you
and
do.
turn signals, you get the
But-
brake lights.
but
So these vehicles, it's
I'm
not like
thinking,
they don't
I'm
have any
thinking of
brake
the
lights on.
lawsuit down the road that says it doesn't say brake lights. Nowhere does it say that. The same way when, if we don't put the sign, make sure the signs are all up before that particular HOA is online, so to speak, you know, that person's going to say, well, yeah, I was driving there, but there was nothing was posted. There was nothing on the signs. There were no signs at all, as a matter of fact. So, you know, should we not allow a subdivision to start the process until all the signs are in place? You know, I mean, these things sound ridiculous, and they are, but that's what wins lawsuits.
Further comments, Mr. O'Connor?
Well, I'll only say that, as the chief adroitly pointed out, we tried to do this 8 years ago to the chagrin of quite a few members of council. It was quite an ordeal. This is, as I view it, and Mr. Johnson's had some valid points, but you have to start somewhere, and I think this is a place to start. There are some things in here that I think we probably could tweak, one of which is the general distance between a residence and a golf course. It's probably going to be more than a mile to get from certain points in a community, and we probably need to amend that or delete it, because it's going to be, it could be a mile from Banbury to Harbor Trees Golf Club, so you do want to limit somebody to half a mile. I think that's something we need to do there, but the reality is, and I see the golf carts in Sagamore consistently, and we need to do something to, if not, you know, people don't want to protect themselves, maybe we can help them do it, because I see 13-year-old kids driving around in golf carts that have no business driving around in 30-mile-an-hour golf carts on the street. So we need to give the chief and his team something to work with to try to keep things from happening, whether or not it's from a safety perspective. Will it help? I think so. Doesn't mean that we can protect people from themselves, but at least this is a step in the right direction. So anyway, I don't know if I want to make a motion to take that language out of there at this point, but I think we're going to have to do it at some juncture, because right out of the chute, you're going to be driving more than half a mile to get from point A to point B. So I guess I'd make another motion to amend the ordinance section, I think it's 76-04K1, and delete the language within 1/2 mile of the operator's residence for golfing purposes, because they may be going to the beach club. So why don't we clean that up, take that out of there, and so I'll make that motion in addition to the previous amendment. That
There's
was
a new motion to amend. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Wiles. All those in favor of the motion to amend?
I have a discussion too on that.
Opposed? 9-0, or 8-1, sorry. Discussion on that, Mr. Brown?
Just discussion on that is, I want to make sure that the way that's written does not allow them to go out onto a busier street that they would ordinarily would not be allowed onto. But because of the way this is written, they go, oh, wait a minute, read it, it's right there.
I agree, and I think it's prudent to utilize the amendment that you have discussed.
Mr. Howard, do you think that we're okay on that one?
The absolute prohibition would supersede the exception. I think we'll leave our officers to that. If there's a groundswell of problems, then we'll tweak it a little bit.
Okay.
I would just like, Mr. Taylor?
I just got one quick question
Okay.
for the people that worked on this ordinance. I know we need to put an ordinance in place. Was there any thought to starting this ordinance in golf course communities first, instead of dragging it citywide into an HOA? Was there any thought to that at all?
I think part of that thought was the knowledge of the existing golf carts that there are currently, and knowing that they're, 20 years ago, golf carts would be very prevalent in golf cart communities, but now that's kind of exploded as our city has grown. And I think that's kind of what led us to this current draft. Correct me if I'm wrong, members of the committee that were there. Mr. Boyce?
I'm not even, wasn't on this, so I probably shouldn't be speaking, but to the point, my neighborhood is one of the smallest in Noblesville, and we have 9 people that own golf carts and are driving them and letting their kids drive them every day right now in that neighborhood. 9. That's what, a quarter of the homes in our neighborhood, a fifth of the homes in our neighborhood have golf carts.
Mark, do you think it will really change, though, that their kids, all of a sudden, we put this into place and their kids won't drive anymore?
I think that
Really?
now the officers will have a good way to go after them and go after their
Yeah.
parents if they're doing something that the officer finds dangerous, and that's why I want to give the officer that ability to do so.
I don't think it's going to change the behavior.
And also, the guy that's driving home drunk at night, it gives our officers the ability to go after them.
But they could anyway.
Mr. Taylor?
They could without this.
But then we'd have to close down Harbor Trees, and I'm not willing to do that.
Mr. Taylor?
But to your point, Mr. Boyce, if we did it in golf cart communities, your situation in your area doesn't have golf course, unless you've moved it I don't know of. So if you
No, but
only
you
did
think
it,
all of those people are going to sell their golf carts?
you're wanting something you can enforce. If you do it in the golf course communities first, before we stretch it on out, then they're against the violation, and you can take care of that problem. You're going to enforce it one way or the other. You're going to enforce it whether we pass this, or you're going to enforce it whether we do it just where there's golf courses.
You enforce it with every single one, then you might as well I think you're going to have to double the chief's force.
He's going to have to do it anyway. If they're abusing it now, he's
I'm
going to
not
have to
saying all of
enforce
them are
it.
abusing it. There are some that'll be fine, but it does.
I don't know, it's just a question.
Mr. Johnson?
But the reality, Mr. Taylor, is that Mr. Boyce and Chief Jowett's community, because it's the same one, they can't do this because they can't go to any golf courses from their place.
Good point.
They can't go to North Harbor.
I know, but my point is, we were wanting to enforce a golf cart
No,
ordinance.
I agree with
Why
you.
didn't we start in the golf course
But
communities first and then stretch out, instead of making it citywide and picking on HOAs only? That's my opinion. We beat this to death, I'm done.
yeah, no, that's why I brought this up, was because Mr. Boyce pointed out there are at least 9 people, and it'll probably explode once this, maybe not.
I don't think anybody.
But let's say it stays at 9. They can't drive any of these places we're talking about anyway. They could go to the park possibly, Morse Park maybe, probably.
Mrs. Wiles?
I'd like to make a motion that we move forward approval of previously discussed ordinance number 60-12-17 as amended with the 2 amendments that have
There's been a motion to
proposed.
approve. Is there a
Second.
second? There's a second by Mr. Boyce. This will be a roll call vote. Mr. Air?
Aye.
Sorry.
Do you do the roll call?
Yeah.
Okay.
You're not president anymore. I'm
I'm
just kidding.
sorry.
I'm just teasing. Just trying to keep it light for a minute. Sorry.
You have to do the roll call now.
Sorry.
Called out.
Whatever.
Mr. Air?
Sorry.
Aye.
Mr. Boyce?
Aye.
Mr. Hampton?
Nay.
Mr. Johnson?
Hey,
Mr. O'Connor?
Aye.
Ms. Rowland? Mr. Taylor?
Nay.
Ms. Wiles?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion passes 6-3. Thank you all very much for the discussion. We will move on with the agenda item. Proposed development presentation number 1. Council to consider introductory information concerning amendments to Meredith Meadows and adopted plan development. Ms. Yelton.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
This item before you today is here for any comments that the council may have on proposed amendments to the Meredith Meadows plan development. As you may recall, Meredith Meadows was approximately a year ago, basically came back to amend the Meredith Meadow plan in order to include, at that time, what were many storage warehouse units in this area.
Our computers are not on.
Let me fix this.
The computer screens are not on. Our screens are not seen, so we're not seeing what you're seeing. But we'll just turn around.
Are they on now?
Nope.
Yes.
There
There
they
they are.
There you go.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. And at that time, basically, when they did come back with that amendment, as you may recall, it was Chris Ham and Jerry Reynolds that brought that first amendment. It does contain, again, it is in the Meredith Meadows, what is remaining of this, basically 16.7 acres. This was the plan that was adopted at that time. They did come back approximately 6 months after that and basically proposed another amendment, not so much to the plan layout, but to the architecture of the many storage warehouse units at that time. And again, that amendment was approved by the council. We are here today to basically discuss proposed amendments to the Meredith Meadows plan development. I'm going to compare these two plans, the one on the right being the new proposed plan. As you can see, the many storage warehouse units are still there. They have both basically climate control and what I consider exterior access units only. They still have the two proposed, I'm going to say retail office type uses. As you can see in this small area here, which was approximately 2.6 acres, there was nothing proposed in that particular area. They have now proposed basically the layout of a proposed what I'm going to call as a preschool. They also have proposed to basically not only make those amendments to the plan. One of their other amendments is to try to reduce the size of these buildings. In the corporate campus plan development, those buildings are required to be a minimum square footage of 10,000 square feet. They would like to be able to reduce those to a minimum of 7,000 square feet. Not saying that they would be constructed at 7,000 square feet, but they want to be able to have the opportunity to do so. The other thing that they are requesting is that the building that basically is closest to Greenfield Avenue be allowed to have a drive-through window. Again, the corporate campus plan development regulations do not allow for drive-through windows. Their final amendment that they are proposing basically deals with the architecture of the building. I'm going to make a comparison here of what they are proposing. This being the self-storage unit, the one on the top is basically what was adopted by the council with their second proposed amendment. What you see below is basically what they are now proposing, which basically the materials are the same. The style and the relief that is brought to the bottom part of the building is quite different. Again, this would be the rear of that structure. This was, again, what was proposed and adopted, the top one. And as you can see, we still will have basically a lot of relief. They are just done with basically pitched roofs as opposed to, I'm going to say, the flat style that was originally proposed. The other item dealing with architecture, this was what was adopted again for the retail buildings. They are now proposing that, again, these retail buildings would, again, look a little different, again, would have pitched roofs, at least on the end units, it appears to have a little bit more relief as far as some setbacks and other additional architectural features. The building that they would propose, what I'm going to say, the southern building on this plan, which would be this building here, is, I'm going to say, the office-type structure. Again, the original proposal did not have a different building because the two buildings that they were proposing were going to be basically all retail. And again, this is their proposed office-type structure, again, has a pitched roof, and again, the same relief or architectural features as the other items. And the final building, which again would be what would be proposed in this area here, is basically a preschool, and again, a lot of architectural relief because of the fact that there are different roof lines. With that, I will ask if you have any particular questions for staff, and if not, the applicant is in the audience with his representatives to make their presentation and pitch to you.
Great. Any questions for Ms. Yelton?
Mr. Jensen?
Yes, Mr. Ayers?
Ms. Yelton, the proposed new ordinance calls for an Exhibit D and references an Exhibit D, and I did not find an exhibit.
I'm sorry. You said reference to?
An Exhibit D, well, Section 5.
Well, I've got my book so out of order, I couldn't find it if I wanted to.
There you go.
We have an Exhibit D
You do? I don't have an Exhibit D. On the new ordinance?
under 5.
You've got a nice fancy book. I have
Did you
this.
look in your?
Okay. Again, this is going to be Exhibit D that was in the original ordinance. The only thing that would be amended out of that Exhibit D, of that original ordinance, would be, again, the minimum square footage for the retail or office buildings would go from the 10,000 square feet that is required down to a minimum of 7,000 square feet. But that was a part of the original ordinance, which was 8612-16.
So the only two changes in, I did not get a copy of this. So the only two changes are the two that are being referenced, the square footage and the drive-through window. Only two changes on the Exhibit D.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, yes.
Any other questions for Ms. Yelton? Mrs. Rowland?
Your first two comparisons that you showed, which are the plan showing the landscaping, the very first two.
Site plans, I believe.
These two, that one, and I have another one. This one.
Yes, that's it. It looks like to me the landscaping doesn't compare. Is there a change in that?
Okay, they're not, what I'm going to say is they're not varying from any landscaping requirements as far as what is going to be required along either Union Chapel or Greenfield Avenue. The only thing that I can say is they will meet those requirements, whatever those requirements happen to be. There's already, they don't have to do it. Here's what I'm going to say. In this first plan that was adopted, it was very linear. Our ordinance does not require the shrubs and trees to basically align linear and, along the roadway. They have, as long as they have the numbers, there are certain spacing requirements that they can meet in order to make it look more interesting. Now, I'm not saying, what I'm going to tell you right now is this preliminary plan has nothing to do with, I'm going to say, their landscaping requirements. What it does have to do with is this additional building, the reduction in size of these two buildings. You know, architectural requirements, landscaping requirements, those are all remaining the same, except for, you know, the reduction in the size of the buildings and the drive-through window.
Any other questions for Ms. Yelton? Mr. O'Connor?
Joe, are you saying that the entrances, Greenfield, Union Chapel, are there passing blisters contemplated along those two? I haven't asked the city engineer, so I'm not sure there is or there isn't, but I would assume there are.
There are. You know, again, this is, you know, kind of like a conceptual plan, so the conceptual plan doesn't always show that we have passing blisters or accel, decel lanes. You know, those are required, and those, absolutely, when they come through with their detailed development plan, which, again, the council doesn't see, it is done through the Technical Advisory Committee. Again, those are items that would have to be met.
Thank you.
Further questions for Ms. Yelton? Mrs. Rowland?
Drive-through window issue. What was the original thinking with the corporate campus in not allowing that? And now I assume we don't have any out there, do we not? Or do we?
We have several.
Well,
Except
okay.
for the fast foods and that sort of thing? Is that
Banks.
considered?
Thanks.
Fast foods, all that.
Okay, so that's not a huge change. It's already happened.
Okay, you know, it's already happening. Let's take, for instance, you know, you've got basically the Hamilton Town Center, which is a part of the corporate campus, but they have their own PD that has been adopted. The same thing across the street from the Hamilton Town Center, which is the Saxony development, or where Cabela's is, which again is part of Saxony. They have their own development standards. In all those cases, they do allow drive-through windows. When we did the Meredith Meadows, originally way back in, it was probably the mid-2000s, it probably really just wasn't contemplated at that time. I think a lot of it had to do with they knew what they were going to do with, I'm going to say, this very eastern portion, having the multifamily rental units there. They really didn't know at that time what else they were going to do. So they pretty much just left into place what was allowed under the corporate campus standards, and they didn't ask for any modifications.
So this would be an exception within the corporate campus because it does not have its separate PD as does Hamilton.
That's correct. I mean, it's not allowing them anything that we haven't already allowed the Hamilton Town Center group to do, or, you know, the Saxony Corporate Campus group to do.
But they've got their own.
That is correct, and so does Meredith Meadows. I mean, this is their own PD, but like I said, I think when it very first started, other than they felt like sometime it might develop, you know, commercially or with office uses, they didn't have a plan that actually set out those commercial and office uses really up until about a year ago.
Further questions from Ms. Yelton? All right, would the developers like to come forward?
Now, have I muddied the waters for you on that?
Evening.
Good evening. My name's Sam Swafford. I'm an associate at the law firm of Fagery Baker Daniels. Happy to be here tonight representing Revel and Underwood. Here tonight for Revel and Underwood is Rory Underwood, who's the president and a resident of Noblesville, specifically a resident of Sagamore, as well as Tyler Underwood, who is a senior associate at the company. As Joyce Ann mentioned very well, Revel Underwood is seeking an amendment to the Meredith Meadows Plan Development for the 16 acres at the southeast corner of Union Chapel Road and Greenfield Avenue. The one thing to point out is that when Reynolds family initially got this property zoned, they were planning on developing this property, maybe having a management company deal with the self-storage aspect of it, but those plans didn't come to fruition, and hence now we have Revel and Underwood coming in to purchase the property, develop the property. They're going to manage the self-storage aspect, which they have experience doing, and additionally, they are going to relocate their corporate headquarters from Fisher's to the office building, which is located on the middle portion of the site plan here, which is the C2 building. So they're looking to relocate their corporate headquarters. As far as the typical request, it is broken up into 4 various parts. The first is to update the conceptual layout, which Joyce Ann showed the difference. In general, the general concept is remaining pretty much the same, other than adding that additional building on the southern portion of the property. They also are updating the architectural elevations since they weren't involved in that initial PD amendment with the Reynolds family. They're going to have their own architectural elevations. Regarding the drive-through and having it on the north side of the property, I believe the drive-through uses are generally permitted, except they cannot face any street, and that may be something I need to confirm with Joyce Ann. And so the way this, so generally they're permitted, just they can't face any street. And the way this lot up in the northeast corner, which this would apply to, it's kind of an interesting shaped lot, and realistically the most practical place to have a drive-through window and drive-through lane would be in the north side of the property, just because having it on the west side, that would be inhibiting the entrances into those businesses. Having it on the south side could cause a traffic concern with the entrance on the west side as well as that entrance on the east side. So having it on the north side is probably the most practical place to have that. And additionally, just on the other side of that property, just north of Greenfield Avenue, that property is zoned commercial, planned business, so it wouldn't be facing a residential neighborhood looking into a drive-through lane or a drive-through window. And then the final request, as Joyce Ann laid out, is to reduce the minimum square footage for these buildings to 10,000 to 7,000, just to provide some more flexibility for the ultimate end users, just because some end users require more parking than what maybe the UDO requires, and that may require a smaller building footprint. So the ultimate end goal there is to provide some more flexibility in the long run. We're really excited about this project. I think the total investment is going to be around $13 million, and myself, as well as Revel and Underwood's team here, would happy to answer any more questions that you may have. Thank you.
Any questions at this time for the developer? Mr. Hampton?
Just a question on the, do we know yet what the business is for the drive-through window? And a question about that traffic flow. Is that service road, I work in a place where sometimes there's a Starbucks there, and that the line pours into the service road and really becomes a problem sometimes. Help me with those.
Yeah, with the traffic, and Roy, if you correct me, but it would be, so if people were to come in here, the drive-through would be on this north side of the property. If people were to come in here, they wouldn't be able to just cut across directly to that drive-through. They'd have to come all the way around and go through the drive-through that way. And so it would be the similar concept of coming through the southeast or the southwest. Yeah.
Additional questions?
Mr. President?
Mr. O'Connor?
The only comment I would make, since we're just looking at a proposed development here, is on that north end. You may want to do a little more landscaping just to screen the drive-in just a bit. So you may want to work that into the plan, but I have no problem with the drive-in. I think that'll serve this area well if it's a Starbucks or a Dunkin' Donuts or something of that nature. So anyway, that would just be a comment from my side, but the architectural renderings look good, and I think it's very similar to what we approved previously, so that's all I have to say there.
Will golf carts be allowed to go through the driveway?
No.
Too soon.
They can't
Too
get
soon.
there.
They can't get there from here.
Too soon, Mr. Hampton.
Too
soon. Too soon, Mr. Hampton. Additional questions? Ms. Wiles?
It's not a question, but it's just more of a comment and confirmation of a conversation we've had previously about additional landscaping for the drive-through would be beneficial. But I think that it's certainly an improvement over what was already previously approved. So I like where the architectural standards are going. So, thank you.
Taylor?
The list, excuse me, the list for the drive-through will not change as to what it is. I guess now it's not approved, we can't do it right now, but if we approve that, the list would be the same as it is in corporate campus. The
permitted uses?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. We wouldn't be changing the uses.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Moving along, miscellaneous number 1, council to discuss possible additions to an upcoming bond issue. Mr. O'Connor.
Yes, members of council, I think we looked at this previously at the last meeting. Mr. Bennett and his team are endeavoring to come up with numbers that will be representative of what the cost is going to be for the park and the infrastructure related thereto. I think the copy of the original memo is also in here for your review. Mr. Bennett is here to give us just a brief update on where he is, and I suspect once we've heard from Brandon briefly, we'll probably postpone this to the next meeting because we need to come to grips with what that final number needs to be. And so Mr. Ayer has a question.
I had some discussion with Mr. Bennett earlier. With the information that he has yet to get compiled, I think he thought it might be of interest to get that information to us over the next few days, and then he would come back and do a presentation.
Which is fine. Are you?
You're welcome.
agreeable, Mr. Bennett?
You've been here a long time, Mr. Bennett. So
that's why I wanted to give him the opportunity to.
I was just seeing if I was going to buy a golf cart or not.
There's a golf cart joke for everybody.
No, I think that's the best approach after talking with several council members earlier is we'll get you some information out, a memo that'll give you some time to chew on some things. And then at that point in time, if you deem it necessary, we'll come back and give a presentation on the overall direction of the park and give you an idea of where we're at on design at that point.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Brandon?
Mr.
Brandon.
Johnson?
Quick question for you. I don't know if you've seen the same letter that we have right here in the form we have it, but at the bottom of page 1, we talk about the Seminary Park and the dog park. They are not one and the same, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Because when you get to the back end of that sentence, it says we're talking about a public meeting on Seminary Park. There's a desire to have improvements made along with providing a dog park for residents. And it almost sounds like it's Seminary Park.
And where that comes from is that when we had the public meeting on Seminary Park, one of the big things we heard at that meeting was that residents that came to talk about that, one of the big items we heard was they also want a dog park. That's what that's referencing.
Yeah, okay. I just want to make sure we hadn't changed the location.
No, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett.
Thank you.
Moving on to council comments. Mr. Ayer?
So I didn't get an opportunity to comment during the infamous golf cart.
He's ill.
Since I didn't get a chance to comment during the infamous golf cart ordinance, I appreciate all the passion and effort that everyone has put into that, and the convictions that a few have over it, and even I have a few also. But that ordinance is an ordinance we can change. We spent over an hour discussing that. We passed the last 350 lot subdivision in 15 minutes, and we can't change it. So I think if we could impose that same conviction on some of our other projects, it would be interesting to see where they came out. So
I will just say too, as I echo Mr. Ayer's comments about tonight's meeting. I just want to thank everyone for their passion and their respect for one another in this debate. I guess one of the downsides of being president is you all basically said everything I was going to say in my statement. But I'll just say thank you for the positive debate and the productive debate. I think at the end of the day, this ordinance isn't perfect. I don't think anything government does usually is. But I think it's a step in the right direction, and it's a step towards more public safety, and I think we all can get behind that. So I appreciate all of your time and effort tonight to do that. So, any further comments?
I just want
Mr.
to
Hampton?
echo the mayor's comments during about the city street department and how well they did during when you think it was Christmas Eve and then like New Year's Eve or New Year's Day, when the last little snow hit, for them to be out during the holidays and doing what they did to make our streets safe, I just wanted to commend that team. They did a great job.
To piggyback on that, I would like to say that thank our citizens for taking time, because many of them went on Facebook to applaud our street department for what they did, and they don't often get applauded for what they do, especially via social media. So I just want to thank everyone for chiming in. If you do see a city worker out plowing a street, take a moment to thank them. So, yeah, don't step in front of the truck to thank them, but Mr. O'Connor?
Mr. President, I was going to ask Madam Clerk, did you need a motion and a second to postpone miscellaneous number one? Because we didn't.
It sounded like he was going to do the presentation, and you can just put that on the agenda.
I wanted to clarify before we adjourn.
All right, further
Thank
comments? If none, we'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved in second.
Second.
All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Let's move.
Here's the ayes.